Have you ever seen someone get ejected without saying a word? Well, in the NBA, it's happened multiple times. It's possible to get ejected for shoving or touching someone, but how about for slapping someone's ass? And no one is safe from ejection because you can be ejected for just being a mascot. All of these things have happened in basketball where ejections can happen for extremely dumb reasons, but most of the time, reasons for ejecting someone are pretty legitimate. Like in the case of this incident where a coach got so mad that he threw a chair across the court during some free throws.
The technicals. Looky here. Bobby Knight just threw his chair clear across the free throw lane.
These kinds of incidents show why ejections are even a thing in the first place. However, none of these incidents are the craziest ejections in basketball history. That happened in 2018 where a basketball game basically turned into an international incident and there were so many ejections that a team basically ended up winning because of forfeit. And these kinds of crazy moments are the exact reason why referees might eject someone to avoid a situation getting to that point. However, there are often times that referees misinterpret a situation and have too quick of a trigger finger, which is exactly the case for when these two players were ejected for slapping butts. In 2010, the Phoenix Suns and the Toronto Raptors were in the middle of a meaningless preseason game. During a Suns possession, Grant Hill, while making a move to the basket, was fouled hard by Reggie Evans and fell to the floor. When Grant got back up, he didn't get mad, he just gave Reggie a quick slap on the butt, which Reggie reciprocated. But right after, Grant Hill decided to slap Reggie's butt again, which apparently to referee Bill Kennedy was an affront to God, so he ended up ejecting both of them. Every single person from the fans to the announcers and to even the players involved were bewildered, with no one but referee Bill Kennedy knowing the exact reason why two players exchanging butt slaps would result in an ejection. However, this moment wasn't even the only bewildering ejection where slaps were involved, because during another game, NBA superstar Vince Carter threw the first slap at a former teammate, yet Vince stayed in the game and the refs ejected the other guy.
Vince Carter they were just fooling around there, wow.
Now, Vince Carter at the time was a superstar, but this wasn't the case of a superstar call, it was just a classic case of a ref not seeing the whole picture and overreacting.
But I cannot see, I'm legally blind. That's my story, I'm sticking to it, I'm innocent.
During a lull in play, Vince had gone and playfully slapped his former teammate, Mo Peterson, in the face. Mo obviously retaliated with his own playful slap, and anyone watching could tell there was no ill will involved. However, Mo's slap was a case of terrible timing because the referee only caught the tail end of it and assumed it was hostile. And boom, Peterson was immediately ejected. Mo, obviously in disbelief, tried to argue with the ref, and even Vince tried to explain that it had all been in good fun, but it was all too late because Mo's ejection was upheld. Mo, over a friendly slap exchange that he didn't even start, had to eat an ejection. But as crazy as this was, it probably isn't as crazy as getting ejected while literally not saying a word.
Timeout LA. Whack! Get out!
One of the biggest personalities in the late 90s to early 2000s basketball was undoubtedly Rasheed Wallace. Wallace was known to be an extremely gifted player, but he was also very confrontational and outspoken, especially with referees. Throughout his career, Wallace would constantly antagonize, argue, and taunt refs, even popularizing the phrase "ball don't lie," which was something he would yell whenever an opponent missed a free throw he thought was undeserved. Actions like these obviously made Wallace very unpopular with refs, and to this day, he holds the records for most single-season technical fouls and most ejections of all time. However, even amongst Wallace's most wild ejections, there is one that is the most baffling of them all. And this was during a pivotal Game 1 of the Western Conference Finals, where Wallace was ejected from the game for literally staring. Prior to this ejection, Wallace had already received one technical foul when he had argued with referee Ron Gerritsen over an earlier questionable foul call. However, later in the game, Wallace, who was still annoyed with Gerritsen, responded to Gerritsen not with words, but by constantly staring him down. This reaction by Wallace made Gerritsen feel like Wallace was trying to intimidate him, and he ended up jetsoning Wallace from the game. When Wallace's teammate Steve Smith questioned the call, Gerritsen told him that Wallace never said anything at all, he simply kept staring, ignoring 3 different warnings to stop. However, as petty and baffling as this ejection was, it wasn't as petty as when Tim Duncan was ejected. because even though this ejection resulted in a referee getting suspended, the referee openly said if given the chance, he would do it all over again.
And another technical foul. And this is when Duncan's out of the game. He's thrown Duncan out of the game.
Tim Duncan, for all of his career, had a reputation as one of the most mild-mannered superstars in NBA history. It was rare to see him get a tech, much less an ejection, but during this random 2007 game, Duncan wasn't ejected for getting angry or going at the ref, he was ejected for literally laughing too much. During the game, while Duncan was on the bench, referee Joey Crawford out of nowhere hit Duncan with a technical foul for apparently something Duncan had said. Duncan was flabbergasted by the call, however, it didn't end there because a few minutes later, when Duncan started to laugh on the bench, Crawford saw this and took it personally, immediately teeing up Duncan a second time and ejecting him from the game. Everyone, including Duncan, was stunned at Crawford's decision, with many of Duncan's own teammates not even realizing he had been ejected until Duncan left the bench. Duncan, in disbelief, left for the locker room, and on the way out, when asked by a sideline reporter if he had said anything to Crawford, Duncan said no. Crawford's ejection of Duncan was so universally panned that the league ended up indefinitely suspending Crawford for it. However, reportedly, Crawford was unrepentant toward the situation, telling the league that he would eject Duncan again if given the same chance. Crawford was power tripping on a different level. However, as bad as Crawford was with this ejection, Steve Javie, another referee, might have even worse calls. Steve Javie is remembered as one of the NBA's most intense, confrontational, and dramatic referees. This was because Javie had no problem ejecting people as he saw fit and had a history of never backing down from a call. And to his credit, he didn't discriminate about who he would punish on the court, because at one point, Javie even ejected a Portland radio analyst for reportedly complaining too much about Javie's calls. And somehow, this wasn't even one of his craziest ejections, because during one game, he went on an ejection spree, even ejecting a mascot. During a random regular season game between the Washington Bullets and the Indiana Pacers, Javie decided he was going to fill his ejection quota for the month and ejected 3 different people. The first person was Purvis Ellison, a Bullets player who was ejected when a dispute got heated and he threw a ball toward another referee. The second ejection was when Bullets coach Wes Unseld protested Ellison's ejection, but Javie was having none of it and tossed him too. But it didn't end here, because when the Bullets mascot named Hoops mocked Javie and tried to rile the crowd, Javie with no hesitation called his third ejection and tossed the mascot. And this incident was so bad that Javie was actually given an undisclosed disciplinary action by the NBA. Steve Javie was definitely an interesting ref. However, while these outrageous ejections are often publicized as incompetent refs getting in their feelings, there are definitely moments where ejections are 100% deserved, which is the case for Coach Bobby Knight.
An excellent free throw shooter will have the honors shooting the technicals. Looky here.
If there ever was a coach to define the word freakout, it would 100% be Bobby Knight, because the man's normal way of talking was probably yelling. And nobody was safe from Knight's wrath. Knight would yell at players, journalists, administrators, other coaches, and especially referees. Because of this, there will be many situations where Knight will receive technicals or even straight ejected from a game. And one of his most famous ejections was when he threw a chair across the court. On February 23, 1985, Knight's Indiana Hoosiers were facing Purdue. During the early parts of the game, there were a string of foul calls called against Knight's team, and every foul proceeded to get Knight angrier and angrier until he finally boiled over. When a foul was called against one of his players during an inbounds play, Knight started to swear at a ref, which got him his first technical. However, this just made him angrier, as he basically said screw it, and he proceeded to pick up a chair and throw it across the court. This resulted in his second technical, but Knight wasn't finished as he continued to argue with officials, resulting in his final third technical, and he was tossed from the game. Even after this, Knight stayed so irate that Indiana's athletic director had to come out on the floor to calm him down and escort him out. Knight's outburst not only resulted in him having to leave the game early, but Purdue were able to shoot 6 free throws because of it. And Knight, because of this incident, solidified his reputation as a nutcase of a coach. However, as deserved and crazy as Knight's ejection was, at least it wasn't an international incident. In July 2018, during the FIBA World Cup Asian qualifier, the Philippines were hosting Australia in a game that would live in infamy. Throughout the game, there were already some pre-game antics, physical plays, and things were already chippy, but everything really popped off partway through the third quarter. With Australia having a nearly 30-point lead, Filipino player Roger Pagoy shoved Australian player Chris Goulding to the ground. Because of this, in retaliation, Australian big man Daniel Kickert decided to do some Muay Thai and proceeded to hard elbow Pagoy in the face. This incident sparked off a massive brawl with fighters throwing punches left and right, some fans and non-team personnel joining the fight, and even NBA player Don Maker throwing flying kicks at Filipino basketball players.
Have a look at these flying punches and kicks that come from the Filipinos.
And the fight proceeded to get even worse, where groups of players were ganging up on one player, fans were throwing objects from their seats, and someone did their best Bobby Knight impression and threw a chair at an Australian player. When the fighting finally fizzled out, officials ended up ejecting 13 players in total, specifically 4 Australian players and 9 Filipino players. Because of this, the Philippines ran out of eligible players, and when play resumed, they only had 3 men left to put in the game. However, 2 of these players quickly fouled out, and the referees had to call off the game entirely, giving Australia a win by forfeit. In the aftermath of this, FIBA ended up suspending all the ejected players with multiple game suspensions, fining both countries' coaches and federations, and promised to improve security for future events. And based on how this brawl literally involved multiple countries and how crazy it was, it is probably the craziest ejection situation of all time.
Look, Pim, I know it's our job to help this guy and everything, but I think this guy's a lost cause. He's obviously made up his mind. Why don't we just cut our losses and get out of here?